Hello, and thank you so much for joining me once again. Today we are doing a pink denim jacket, and I used a pattern that is actually available from Tatiana over on Etsy. She is selling it in her shop, which is called DollsPatterns, and of course I will link that below as well. She also wanted to offer a bit of a discount for a week or two. So if you see this video when it first comes up, stick around to the end and I will give you that code. Yeah, this is a really fun pattern. It is so detailed. So buckle up. Here we go. Alright, so there's a lot of pieces to put together for this pattern, and since we are using denim, it is going to be important to make sure that you are putting right sides together when you sew things. So the back pieces, we're going to do that. The front pieces, and you are going to want to keep your pattern pieces with the actual cutouts because it would be really easy to mix these up. I've got them sitting up there. I am just pinning everything in place before I go over to the sewing machine, just so that it doesn't get lost in the shuffle and I sew the wrong thing to the other wrong thing. I've also noticed that I didn't iron my denim before this. I really should have. Honestly, it is a good idea to iron your material before you even cut. I apparently didn't. I don't know why. Once we go over to the machine, I'm going to straight stitch everything and then I'm going to zigzag over the edge. And the reason to do that is it's a beautiful finish. And since we are going to be top stitching everything, I just want to make sure that this is very sturdily put together and that nothing is sliding around and that it's not going to fray everywhere. That's right, I didn't use fray check this time. Weird, right? Now, after we've stitched everything down, we are also going to top stitch. And my first try, I decided to do a single needle and just top stitch twice. I decided that I didn't like that and I switched over to a double needle for the rest of the project. Now, what I'm doing here, I will explain in more detail in just a second, but I do want to apologize real quick because I apparently just forgot to put one of my main lights on, so you can see it's very dark and the light that is there is glaring, which is making this a little tough to follow. So in this pattern, what she has you do is actually use the pattern piece and trace around it, not actually hitting the pattern piece. Like, you put the pattern piece on your 2 layers of fabric and you trace around it with the needle. And then she has you cut it out after the fact, which I think is a really interesting technique. And I'm excited to get to try it. You'll want to make sure that you're trimming down your corners like you always would, and just make sure you don't cut the stitching lines. But yeah, this is a really cool technique and I think I'm probably going to keep using it for other projects. Then I pop everything right sides out with a pencil to push the corners out. I did that for all the pieces. And then this is another technique in the pattern where you actually do your top stitching with the item kind of pinned to a piece of paper as a sort of stabilizer. I do recommend being a little bit more careful about what paper you use because you can see this one had printing on it, and I decided to get the paper wet because I thought I was super clever, and it made a big mess and the ink from the paper almost bled onto my stuff. So don't really recommend doing that with paper that's been printed on. Now we're moving on to pinning all of the pieces. The little flaps you want to baste down, and she recommends hand basting. I do not hand baste, so we're just using a big wide stitch on the machine. I am also stitching the back yoke down as well, and then going over that seam with a zigzag, again to prevent fraying. I am also zigzagging the sleeve pieces, and I'm doing this in a big long chain to try and, I don't know, be a little more conservative with my fabric. It saves time too, so this is kind of a fun technique I picked up from, I think, Angela Clayton's channel. Then we pin down the sleeves, and we are leaving the bottom of the sleeves open, so I got that mark off of the pattern pieces. I'm also trimming off my extra thread because you want to keep up on that with this project. There's so many seams that, yeah, you just want to keep up on it. Then I put those on totally wrong, and I couldn't figure out why it wasn't working, and I realized, oh, yes. So you want to make sure that you're lining everything up correctly. It took me a while to figure it out. There we go. Finally got it. Alright, so we've got more top stitching to do, and the sleeves, to get the slit to look nice, she recommends ironing the majority of the seam inwards because we will be top stitching on this side, but for the slit we do need this piece to come this way, so you just kind of iron that in. And if you are doing like blue denim with the orange stitching, you would want your top stitching on this side to be orange, and then you just want a single top stitch over here in your dark blue to sort of blend it. You don't want this to have obvious top stitching like this side, which is very decorative. So we've got both of those done. We've got our back, which is going to need the top stitching along the top, and the two front pieces, which are the same. And oh my god, look at these cute little flaps. Oh my god, they're so cute. Oh, I love it. And here you can see I did switch over to the twin needles because it makes the top stitching go, well, twice as fast, honestly. They can be a little fiddly, as you can see. I had to completely unstring it and then go ahead and try it again. Sometimes it just catches and I don't know what, it's gunked up in the middle somewhere, and just redoing it fixes the problem. So now we top stitch. So we've got this little piece, which is the front facing, and I am going to stitch along the what's basically the back neck of the front facing next, and then I also pin down the shoulder seams, which are pretty simple, and do a whole bunch of gathering stitches on the sleeves. So there, that's basically the back neck, and then I also just go ahead, get out of the way, zigzagging all the way around the wider edge, because that is the one that's not really going to get finished otherwise. Then we do our shoulder seams. And just a whole lot of gather stitches. I do 2 of them for each of the sleeve caps. I find that this makes a more invisible gather when you don't want it to look obviously gathered. Alright, so now we're going to, yes, you see I have the collar pinned. The important part there is to make sure that the collar is centered exactly, so you want the same amount of extra on both sides, because you will have extra on both sides. And then we baste the collar down with a wide stitch or hand stitching, whichever you prefer. And now we put the facing in. The center back goes in the center back of the collar and the rest of the jacket, and then everything else lines up beautifully. You've got to kind of squish all that extra fabric because that's going to be in the way, but the front pieces line up gorgeous. And especially with the curve of the interior collar part, I highly recommend using a whole bunch of needles to get it as even as possible. And then we just stitch it down with a straight stitch. And I put my needle down to go around sharp corners, makes a nice sharp edge, which you definitely want with collar pieces. And then for the interior of the collar, just go super, super slow. Don't run over any obvious folds. Make sure you readjust and get those out of the way. And then straight shot down the front again. And then we zigzag across that whole seam, which is a lot easier to do because you've already done the hard part. Now you can kind of see I'm just checking it out to make sure that I didn't accidentally run over any obvious wrinkles. I didn't, so I go through and I snip this edge. You're definitely going to want to snip this edge so that when you do fold your facing towards the center on the inside, it's going to lay a lot flatter and nicer. And I think I actually do have to go back and do extra clipping. I didn't do enough the first round, but this is just a lot of fighting with it, playing with it, get your iron out, iron the snot out of it. It does lay right, it just takes a lot of convincing. Then we top stitch. So after all that ironing and convincing, now I'm going to make sure that it does not go anywhere. And I'm going to do that by just doing a little top stitch about, oh boy, maybe a hair over a millimeter from the edge. Pretty much as close as I could get it and keep it straight and even. This again, just, go slow, convince it. Try to feel while you're sewing to make sure that there's no obviously lumps or bumps underneath what you're doing. Keep that collar out of the way because it's going to want to be in the way. And then once the initial top stitching is done, I go back and add another top stitch that's about 5 millimeters, maybe just under 1/4 of an inch away from the first one. I just used the edge of my presser foot to line up and make it straight. Alright, so that's looking pretty awesome. Now we need to set the sleeves, which earlier we had ran a bunch of gather stitch on. And the purpose of the gathering stitches with a jacket like this isn't to make obvious gathers like you would with a cute ruffly dress or something. This is specifically to ease a curve into a different shaped curve, basically. Mostly it's to avoid any obvious bumps. For this one, I do use a whole bunch of pins, just because it really matters. You don't want your fabric gathering in any one spot. And I've made a mistake. That line is supposed to match up with the line on the back of the jacket. So we get to pull it and try again. I totally didn't even remember that that was a thing when I first started sewing, and as soon as I saw the back of the jacket I was like, oh no, that's gotta line up, doesn't it? And then I do sew the underarms and down the side seams, which I didn't have a clip showing how to set that up, but this is pretty straightforward. We do this for most doll outfits. Oh, and apparently my thread decided to unthread itself. That happens sometimes. There we go. Off we go again. And with this material you are going to want to clip under the arms. This step is exciting. So now we're going to do the waistband. And I cut my waistband a little bit extra long because I just wanted some extra. But all I've done to prep to this point is ironed the waistband in half. So you can see my iron line. And I do the same for the cuffs, because the cuffs are done exactly like the waistband is. You do just stitch that down with your normal seam allowance. I lost that footage, unfortunately. Alright, so this is where the magic trick comes in. So we've got that. Now what we're going to do is fold this back against the crease that we ironed in. So fold back and then fold this back over. And when we sew, we want to sew right outside this piece. We don't want to catch this. We want to be just on the other edge of it. And we're going to do exactly the same thing for the sleeves. You can definitely see I did add quite a bit extra just to make sure that I had enough, because in a sec here we're just going to clip all that off anyway, so it's not a big deal to have it there. And you do want to make sure that you're trimming and trimming and trimming. There is so many loose threads. Oh, so many of them. I did start trimming them with my little scissors, and you can see I'm having trouble, so I switch right over to the big ones because, yeah, that denim is not the easiest to cut through 4 layers of. This part is where the trick comes in. You just flip it and it's beautiful. Like, is that not the coolest trick in the world? I'm so excited. I'm gonna start using this a lot, I think. Especially, you can do it for other waistbands, not just jacket waistbands. You can do it for jeans waistbands. And yeah, it looks really, really good. And the inside looks really good, which is always the biggest trick. I do end up trimming a whole bunch off of that end just because there is so many layers, so you can trim that little bit off, and then I also trim off the folded over edge because it's served its purpose, and especially with doll clothes, it'll be fine. So once you're done getting everything trimmed and flipped and pinned, then you basically just top stitch a rectangle over your waistband and cuffs. And of course the hardest part about this is making sure it's straight and that you don't run out of bobbin thread halfway through. You can kind of see, especially with precision work, I will stop a little bit ahead of time and then I'll hand crank it just to get it to exactly the spot I need it to be. And with doll clothes, sometimes I'll even pull up my presser foot and readjust the tiniest bit. If your stitch length is short enough, that's not usually necessary, but every now and then it just doesn't work out quite the way I want it to, so I'll have to cheat it even more than usual. Though if you are pulling your presser foot up, you want to make sure that your needle is down, so you're pinning your fabric in place while you do it. That is huge for not only just precision work, but like top stitching, anything that's going to be super visual. And there we have it. It doesn't have closures, and it's killing me a little, but the ones I want don't ship from overseas and can sometimes take like literally months, and since I know I'm moving, I can't buy them yet. It's driving me bonkers. But other than that, I absolutely adore how this turned out. I love the colors. I had so much fun picking the fabric, which, by the way, was actually donated by my husband. They used to be a pair of his pants that he no longer wears, and now he's telling me I need to make a matching pair of pants for my doll out of them because I have some left over. But yeah, this was a super fun project. I highly encourage you to check it out if you want something challenging that's going to turn out really cool. Head over to Tatiana's Etsy, which is again DollsPatterns. It'll be down below. And if you use my nickname, Sam Sally Underorange, all one word, you will get 10% off until October 1st, 2019. So it's a time sale. Highly recommend checking her out. And thank you so much for joining me. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more of this. Have a great one.